I'm Megan Gleason.
And I'm Dan Boyd.
Welcome to another episode of Rounding Up the Roundhouse.
If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Got real busy. We tried to squeeze 2 into the week, but we were off in committees and floor sessions just about all the time.
Well, and it's Monday. We're officially 12 days to go, as I heard during a news conference this morning. So it's really crunch time for bills to kind of get through committees, and I think some people are starting to feel that panic or sense of dread a little bit of, if their bills aren't moving at this point, it's kind of a sign that they may be in some trouble. But I think some people are also starting to think about, life after the legislative session a little bit.
Yeah, it's really grind time, and I think we'll see if evening floor sessions start popping up. But if your bills aren't on the floors, it's getting to be a really hard time. And not a lot of bills. Well, we're starting to see some bills appear on the other side of the chamber that have passed the floors, and it's kind of trickling on. We're seeing the effects, so things are moving along.
Yeah, and kind of jumping into some of the latest developments here. The House Republicans held a news conference today. They're frustrated about the status of crime bills, which we've reported on, and that a juvenile offender bill was tabled in committee last week. And they're also saying that they've come to the table on issues like healthcare and affordability and haven't been met with a lot of compromise. So some frustration on their part at this point. House Minority Leader Gail Armstrong, we asked her a little bit about the long 3-hour debates in the House, and she did acknowledge, that we're not just trying to stop all Democrat bills, but, we are trying to stop bad bills. And, being in the minority party, time is one weapon they do have to try to draw out these debates and make it at least harder for bills to get through the House if they're not bills that are in favor. So we've seen that strategy in the past, and it seems like that's another thing we'll be seeing some long debates on, even on some bills that don't necessarily seem controversial, but it is one way for the minority to kind of at least slow the pace and make it a little harder for the majority to get bills through.
Yeah, and we saw something similar like that last week. And I do want to point out, on the House, there's a 3-hour debate limit, but on the Senate, there's no limit. But the House, you can't just filibuster forever. You're cut off at 3 hours. But with the geothermal bill that was heard in the House last week, I was a little surprised. It was nearly a 3-hour conversation. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of concerns from Republicans. Kind of a federal standpoint was brought up of we should include nuclear energy as well as geothermal energy. And that's something that maybe you wouldn't expect to have a 3-hour debate on, trying to incentivize more geothermal energy projects. But it was a long debate, and it was a long floor session. We're seeing these floor sessions wrap up around 4 or 5 p.m. I think even over the weekend, maybe last weekend, it was like 8 p.m. when the floor wrapped up.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into some of the Roundhouse strategy for people who are interested in that. I mean, for Democrats, then that means they need to kind of prioritize which bills, when you've got 50 or 60 bills on the calendar, which ones do you prioritize to bring up for a debate, knowing that you might have these 3-hour debates. And then if you're able to maybe bring up a few Republican bills and with the hopes of maybe that'll kind of allow some other bills to get through a little bit quicker. So there is some, I think, negotiating happening behind closed doors that we're not privy to all of that, but to try to decide, which bills can we maybe kind of strike a deal on and get these through a little faster, and which with ones that we know are going to be controversial, when do we call those up, knowing that they might, take a 3-hour debate, and there's only, obviously with 24 hours in a day, only so many hours that you can try and be on the floor, and because there still are in committee, so to try to get bills heard on the floor and get them moved over to the Senate with the clock ticking here.
Yeah, and the way the Roundhouse works, we usually are seeing committees in the mornings and then floor sessions around early or late morning, early afternoon, and then committees again in the afternoon. And we'll probably start seeing evening floor sessions too. So there is a debate limit in committees because you need to go to the floor and start voting on those bills. So it's getting hard to squeeze everything in.
And another with the final 2 weeks of the session now underway, we're expecting the budget to come out of Senate Finance Committee in the coming days. Still don't know exactly which date, but it should be in the next few days. One issue that's emerged as kind of a sticking point or a little bit of a point of controversy in the budget is money for CYFD, which is obviously the state's child welfare agency, and the governor and her secretary have been really pushing legislators, saying that they're underfunding the agency in their budget plans. Legislators have kind of countered back that, well, in the past we've given you more money, and not all that money has been spent, and it doesn't seem like it's really moved the needle. So instead, this year we're going to keep your budget more flat, and you'll get some maybe one-time money to try out some new programs and hire more social workers, and we'll see if those are successful. So that's, I think, one area to keep an eye out. Even this morning, Senate Finance Committee was hearing testimony from CYFD Secretary Teresa Casados, and I was only there for a little while, but it was already getting a little testy. Some of the senators really asking some pointed questions about the department and why there haven't been more results, and and kind of this systemic issues that it keeps facing. And I think it's a point of frustration for a lot of people, just why this agency can't perform better. I mean, I know a lot of people think that would probably be one of the hardest jobs in state government, just because of some factors that are out of your control. But that on the budget issue, I think that's going to be the fight to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, and I think legislators have been pretty honest in acknowledging that it's a really hard job too, that they're not just bashing these secretaries, they are acknowledging how hard the job is, but they want to see change nonetheless. And, while we're on the topic of the budget, I want to bring up the strategic water supply, which made some movement last week. It's a $75 million request initially but we only saw $40 million included in the budget. So cut down quite a bit. And this is the proposal that came in last year asking for $500 million. So it's really been trimmed down. And it's basically a market incentivizing program to get people to treat and reuse brackish water, which is saline water, essentially. And we have a ton of it underground in New Mexico. So that inched forward a little bit. It doesn't have to do with produced water anymore. I think we've talked about that, which is a waste product of oil and gas operations. But I did talk with some staff from the governor's office, and they said that, they are disappointed that got scrapped, but they want this bill to make it through the finish line. The governor wants to sign it on her desk. And even though produced water isn't included in this bill, that doesn't change the regulatory market outside of the legislature, allowing for the treatment and reuse of produced water. And the New Mexico Environment Department is kind of working on moving things forward along with that outside of the Roundhouse.
And I know that Bill brought up a conversation between us, Megan, and I was asking you how much, brackish water does New Mexico have? And you found the answer very quickly, but it was a lot of acre feet, which still is, and millions of gallons of water. So, I mean, we're talking about a lot of water here,
Yeah, trillions of gallons. It's a crazy amount of water. And, I would note too, some of the money, there is money in the budget to conduct more aquifer mapping studies. We don't have a lot of information about the aquifers and how usable the water is, how high in saline content it is, kind of that sort of thing. So there is money to continue researching that.
Well, and while Megan has been tracking more of these environmental and climate bills, for my purposes, there's really two committees right now that kind of stand out that will be tracking a lot of bills in these committees. March Madness hasn't started yet, so if anybody is looking for some good evening entertainment, and that's Senate Finance Committee and Senate Judiciary Committee. Senate Finance Committee obviously has the budget, which we've talked about. It also has a ban on assault weapons, which is a very high-profile, controversial bill that did pass out of its first committee. It also has the paid family leave, which isn't called paid family leave anymore, but that's another bill that I know you wrote about that passed its first Senate committee on Saturday and now goes to Senate Finance. So we'll be watching closely and seeing when they decide to schedule that bill.
Yeah, there's a lot of major bills waiting in Senate Finance, and I think the priority kind of is the budget, and then we'll see some of these bills moving along. But yeah, it's formerly the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. It's called the Welcome Child and Family Wellness Leave Act, which maybe isn't as easy to remember, but it's essentially it's maintained the same changes we saw when it was majorly reformed. And yeah, it passed its first Senate committee. It'll go to Senate Finance, and if it passes there, heads to the floor, where similar but a little different efforts have passed in previous sessions, and we'll see if it lands on the governor's desk.
Yeah, and then the other committee is Senate Judiciary, which some things change at the Roundhouse and some things don't change. Senate Judiciary always seems to be a key committee at the end of a session. A lot of bills get sent there, and they get kind of a bit of a backlog, and then that gives a lot of leverage to Senator Joseph Cervantes, who's the chair of that committee, to decide which bills he's going to hear and which not. I mean, a few of the CYFD bills that we've talked about on a previous episode that were passed by the House, and they only got one committee referral, but to Senate Judiciary. So it'll be interesting to see when those bills are scheduled. They're not on the agenda for today, but I think that committee has something like 15 bills just on its agenda for today. And most of them still Senate bills, but I would expect in the coming days, they'll be hearing more House bills. And certainly Senator Cervantes will be getting a lot of lobbying and people in the hallways trying to get him to schedule those bills, because obviously if they're not up in committee by kind of the middle of next week or so, then committees will typically stop meeting in those final few days of the session because most of the action, goes to the floor. So really a pivotal time for a couple of those committees to see what's on their schedules.
Yeah, and we have colleagues watching today for a bill that may or may not come up in a Senate Health Committee, changes to the medical malpractice law in the state, which some of our colleagues have been tracking pretty closely. And there's been a lot of questions of when is this going to come up in this committee? That particular chair has been sick. So there's a long backlog of bills in that committee. And we'll see if it comes up today. But the clock is ticking. And I believe that's its first committee, isn't it, Dan?
I think that's right. And we don't want to not show the House any love. We know there's some important bills in the House as well. But it is interesting how it seems like a lot of these profiles coming down to the wire, a lot of the big ones will be in the Senate. So yeah, that's one in the Senate Health and Public Affairs Committee. We'll see if it's on their agenda today. We were kind of thinking last week, and then it didn't end up being heard all last week in that committee. And so, yeah, getting, the outlook is probably not good that will get through, but at least to have a hearing and it would be some interesting discussion, kind of see where we go on this issue, which I don't think is going to, go away anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a big one. And I think we'll see it in future sessions if it doesn't. Ultimately pass the finish line this session. And, to give the House a little love, we did see House Bill 140 pass the floor last week. And this is kind of a crazy story of this New Mexico dairy farmer who had to euthanize more than 3,600 of his cows because they drank contaminated well water. And it was found out that the contaminated well water stemmed from a nearby U.S. Air Force base with PFAS. They're known as forever chemicals. And so the Environment Department has been pushing to get a little more authority to get the federal government to clean up PFAS. We've been in this lawsuit trying to get them to clean up the spill that's outside of their base. That's, kind of leaked with water. And so this bill passed unanimously, on the floor, and it goes to the Senate now. And there was a lot of agreement. It was about an hour debate, I think, and everybody agreed like something needs to be done about this. But good points were also raised that this is not the only PFAS issue we need to be addressing. This bill specifically would only address firefighting foam that's discarded, which contains PFAS. But this man-made chemical is everywhere. It's in makeup, it's in carpet cleaners and everyday products. And so the Environment Department is working really hard to kind of raise awareness around PFAS, but also try to get the U.S. Government to clean up this spill that's contaminating eastern New Mexico.
And remind me and other people who might have forgotten what PFAS is an acronym for, not to put you on the spot, but...
Oh my God. This is going to be a horrible... okay, I actually looked up how to pronounce this, but I know I'm going to butcher it. It's oh, Lord.
Poly something, right?
Yes, poly and something substances.
All right, I put Megan on the spot there. We'll get back to you with the full acronym for PFAS. Another one before we leave, go catch up with things. You also had an interesting story about an immigration bill that passed the House and kind of found someone who was personally impacted by the legislation that's moving forward.
Yeah, this was a really interesting one. So this bill, it was formerly known as the Dignity Not Detention Bill. We've seen it in the Roundhouse a couple times. This year, it's called the Immigrant Safety Act. It would ban local municipalities from entering into intergovernmental agreements with federal agencies like ICE for civil immigration detainment purposes. We've got 3 civil immigration detainment centers in New Mexico and Cibola, Torrance, and Otero counties. And this bill would essentially shut all of those detention centers down. And I spoke with Edwin Jesus Garcia Castillo, who grew up in the United States as a dreamer. He came here when he was 1. His parents legally immigrated, and then his DACA status was revoked. He was sent back to Mexico. He ended up being kidnapped by the cartel multiple times. He landed back on U.S. soil, and the final time he was kidnapped, and he asked for asylum in the U.S., and that's how he ended up in the Torrance County Detention Facility. And he spoke about a lot of inhumane and unsanitary conditions there, and he's become this advocate on a policy level, both state and federal, trying to get rid of these detention centers that he said were just inhumane and had a lot of civil violations and different things like that. So the bill passed the House last week, and it was a long 3-hour debate. It's not surprising. We saw a lot of conversations about how this would negatively financially impact the local economies who depend on that for revenue. We did see some interesting floor amendments that attempted to change the bill. So if any federal employee or entity said New Mexico is losing federal revenue as a result of the Immigration Safety Act, it would be repealed after 30 days, which is kind of an interesting, it came from Republicans, and they said, you know how the Trump administration is. They are willing to claw back funds if you make them mad, and this would be a sort of safety net for that. But the amendment was deemed unfriendly, and it didn't pass.
Yeah, and the interesting timing certainly for this to be playing out, given what's happening on the national level. I do think it'd be interesting if this bill were to be passed and signed into law, kind of setting New Mexico up on a little bit of a collision course with the federal government. I mean, we'd obviously see how that kind of plays out, not to get ahead of ourselves, but another one of these issues where we've really kind of noticed the different direction that New Mexico is going in compared to the federal government. And I think we'll be reporting a lot more in coming months and over the next 4 years, about what that all means, but certainly kind of different priorities and kind of, setting the state up for different policies that may go against what the Trump administration favors. So that'll be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's gonna be a busy Roundhouse, but we better get off to floor sessions, I'm thinking.
Yeah. We'll certainly plan to keep everyone posted over the final 12 days of the session. We're going to probably have some late nights and early mornings, but we've got some good snacks and supplies to hopefully carry us through. So we appreciate everyone listening in and following our coverage online and in the paper, and we'll do our best to keep you posted.
Yeah, remember you can find all the content at abqjournal.com, and these episodes are posted on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'll try to come back for another update later this week. Hopefully we'll have the time to squeeze it in, but stay tuned for what's going on in these final 2 weeks.
Thanks for listening.